Welcome to another episode of Budget in Focus, where we discuss Budget 2025. My name is Romario Samru, and with me is the Honorable Minister of Human Services and Social Security, Dr. Vindhya Persaud. As announced last Friday, the 2025 budget stands at $1.382 trillion, Guyana's largest budget, and an increase of 20.6%. Minister Persaud, thank you for joining us. Could you just give us an oversight of Budget 2025?
Thank you, Romario. Budget 2025, I would consider a continuation of the work started by the People's Progressive Party Civic from the moment they got into office. It's a consistent trajectory of development with focus on key areas of health, education, social services, and of course, infrastructure. That is the perfect complement to ensuring that there is not only development, as we want to call it, but connectivity. So this budget has a slew of measures as announced by the finance minister that focuses on key populations of people and also people as a whole. When we think of budget 2025, we can look at the tax measures that will definitely impact on large numbers of Guyanese. And it also focuses on a work ethic, which I really like in this year's budget, encouraging work, encouraging people to go out, be part of the labor market, and to, with their work, be able to gain more financially from the tax breaks that are offered. It also focuses heavily on children, seniors, and persons living with disabilities. Those are very major populations or groupings in our country that require the kind of support and cushioning that Budget 2025 gives. But Budget 2025 is not, I would say, a budget that is very random. I would say it's very strategic and targeted, and it looks at the quality of life of any single person. It also looks at how a family can benefit, starting from the measure announced children born in this year. They will actually be born with something, an incentive by government. And so it gives to the family the understanding that government is looking at support to children, and then it builds on that. It looks at children's education in the sense of the Because We Care cash grant being doubled, and also getting to the point where it's even beyond the $50,000 to $55,000 because it brings in the school uniform grant. Then it looks at the health of the family totally by giving to every person $10,000 towards their health checkups, reminding people that it's important to prioritize health. Then it looks at within that family construct, the senior population, which falls under the purview of the Ministry of Human Services and Social Security. And Romario, our budget stands at $58.5 billion, a $10 billion increase on last year's budget. And we are looking at how 73% of the budget focuses on the senior citizens of our country, ensuring that emphasis is paid to their welfare as well. And we have looked at the promise being delivered by government. And again, this budget is concluding on our manifesto promises. There would have been commitments made, and these commitments have been realized as we complete our tenure in office. And so the doubling of the old age pension is a commitment that has been done. We started at 20,500 in 2020, and now we stand at $41,000 for pensioners. And we're not only looking at the 73% increase in pension, for example, but effective service delivery. How are we making sure that the pensioners receive their pension? The introduction of alternate venues that would have been started under this government, the introduction of direct deposits, bank and MMG, the amplification of shut-in delivery services, direct delivery to remote, rural, and hinterland communities. So it's a very inclusive look at how we go out there and we serve all of the people of Guyana. And then even when we look at how government started off in 2020 by again delivering on a commitment when it came to taxes. And so if we look at the range of taxes that would have been removed, and we looked at the previous administration's way of ensuring their budget growth through taxation. It's quite the opposite for this government. There would have been no new taxes introduced at all over the last few years of our tenure. There would have been a reduction in the taxes that exist. There would have been increase in the tax threshold. And importantly, with the senior citizens population, there would have been the reintroduction of the water and electricity subsidies. And when we look at cumulatively what that would be equivalent to is $1.2 billion directly towards the senior citizens population. So budget 2025 continues on that linear trajectory set by this government, delivering on commitments, but also looking directly at how people could benefit through savings, through increase in disposable income, and how every member of the family will see that budget 2025 is contributing to them.
You mentioned about the developments that this administration would have placed towards senior citizens and pensioner. It adds $4.5 billion of disposable income into the pockets of our pensioners. And while you mentioned a 100% increase in the pension payout, what is interesting to note too is the pension population has already grown significantly. One of the things that was announced in the 2025 budget was a new facility for the elderly. Could you shed some light on that?
Yes, we have noted that the PALMS facility has been in existence for decades, and the government has made a conscious decision to increase the ability by the state to provide care to our senior citizens population, and we are planning to outfit an institution. This will be based in Enmore, so we're building it from ground up, and $800 million plus would have been allocated to the construction of that senior citizen's home. So it's not only looking at the senior citizen who would be in their habitual residence, but it's also looking at those who would require extra care, or they would require that security of residence that they may not have. And I think that is a very practical and an important step in terms of looking at the seniors.
In addition to our pension population, another major program under the Ministry of Human Services is the public assistance. Could you shed some light on what Budget 2025 has for our public assistance recipients and how Budget 2025 fits into the holistic piece of this administration's journey from 2020 to now?
So public assistance is one facet of the support that government would have been providing to those persons who need temporary assistance. As you know, public assistance is temporary assistance, and that since we came into government would have been sharply demarcated by looking at the permanent disability benefit differently, in the sense that a policy announced by His Excellency Dr. Muhammad Irfan Ali was that persons could apply only once. Persons are on the register long term until they hit the age of pension. And although the benefits are equivalent, there is a distinct difference in that this PD, as we call it, or the public assistance benefit for people living with disabilities, is a more long-term benefit. So that's the first one. And going back to the temporary bit of public assistance focused on medical and economic benefits, we would have moved to 22,000 this year, and we have almost, if not crossed, 100% increase on the public assistance benefit. And it speaks to, again, moving people from one stage to a stage where they're comfortable enough to have access not only to the financial monthly assistance, but to also place them in a position to access everything else. There is the 10-day worker program. In addition to the public assistance, they can access a slew of free programs, educational programs. You can access anything from the Women's Innovation Investment Network program, the Board of Industrial Training program, the GOAL program. So there is that focus not only on providing this assistance to supplement someone, but also saying to them very clearly, look, while we are assisting you as government, there are these programs that we would like you to access, and we hope that you will access them, so it moves you even out of that system. And I have to say that education has always been something that this government has focused intensively on, not only universal primary and moving to universal secondary education, but also equipping our population for the development that is actively happening and the development that is yet to come through the provision of the gold scholarships. But more importantly, this year, the University of Guyana will be free. And so there is no reason why people should not upskill through our technical vocational programs nor pursue higher education through all of this free tertiary education, and they should look at it in the line of where the country is going, all this development that is happening across sectors, all the niche employment opportunities that would open, all the entrepreneurial ventures where, for example, heading right back into disability, where people are now not only being given something that is monthly, but there is more. There has been the introduction of the Learning Lab. And if we look at the performance of the Learning Lab and the training that has been done for persons living with disabilities, moving them to a point of entrepreneurial capability, we would have seen every year our targets would have been exceeded, and we would have trained so far over 500 persons living with disabilities, and every person with disability across the length and breadth of Guyana would have been able to access government's revolving fund, which is administrated by the Small Business Bureau, and there they can access a loan that is interest free and has a long payment time. And that loan can really be a launchpad towards them starting their own business. So it's looking at how we can make our people across Guyana, all the peoples across Guyana, independent. And that's an important thing. Through education, through business opportunities, and all through the mindset of saying, yes, government is injecting all of this towards you, but look at where you should be able to take yourself with all the other programs that are readily available. And quality of life is important, because when you speak towards the issue of persons living with disabilities, our assistive aid program, now prior to 2020, that program didn't exist. People could not easily access a wheelchair. Now it's simply a call, a request, and a wheelchair. If they don't want to come in, we get it to them. And not only wheelchairs, walkers, white canes, hearing aids, for example, through the Ministry of Health's program, the prosthesis that is offered, heavily subsidized by the Ministry of Health, sometimes supported by the Ministry of Human Services. And all of these things look at populations that are particularly vulnerable. How can we give them an equal level playing field like everyone else?
Yes, you mentioned that training has been a major factor in what the Ministry of Human Services has been doing for persons living with disabilities. I know in 2024 you've trained 414 persons, and since the program was introduced, 950 persons were trained in total, and this year you plan to train 900 more. And not just at the Learning Lab, but you're taking the training to persons within their communities, within the hinterland regions, and so they don't have to come out. Even those who come out, they're afforded free transportation, free learning material, and free meals. You go out to these communities. What are some of the courses that you tend to offer or expect to offer in 2025 for persons living with disabilities?
Well, we focused heavily on garment construction, and that perhaps was the number one course that people were interested in. We looked at social media marketing, we looked at graphic design, we looked at using JAWS, so people who are blind. We're focusing heavily on the deaf population. There is a commitment in the budget to build a school for persons who are deaf, and we want to ensure that there is more sign language happening. So through the Learning Lab, and as you said, it's a regional program. So while the Learning Lab is the base, and while every year we're turning out more than 500 people year after year, we are training them, and we have started this in a small way in 2021, and we have built to where we are now. Region 1, if you look at what they are achieving through these garment constructions programs, it's not just making a few things, it's making things that can earn them an income later on. But it's really looking at how those persons in the disability populations can utilize these skills in also communication, like the deaf population that I was speaking about. So we plan to train persons in the public sector to be able to effectively communicate. We plan to train persons who are providing care to children with disability, caregivers. So it's not only the persons who have the disabilities, but also the persons who have to interface with them. So that's a novel approach to it. We're also looking at how we can offer things like agriculture. We started in a small way last year. We're looking at things like joinery. We're also looking at child care. We're looking at all of the AI kind of programs. We're looking at programs that can be done from the comfort of the home, where persons can actually gain employment through those programs as well. So we're looking, in addition to from the in-person programs that we're offering, to utilizing Coursera a lot more. I've had those meetings already to look at programs that can be done online and programs that are specifically geared to different categories of disabilities. So whether it is focusing on someone who's blind or someone who's deaf, every program now will be tailored. And I think that is important, Romario, because we don't want to exclude. And I believe, if I have to say, the programs that government has been offering holistically are all inclusive. And more we are building on that accessibility and inclusivity going forward.
Minister, I want to pick your brain a bit and have the viewers them share some of your views on what you want in terms of promoting Guyana. I know when we go out on outreaches, you see the local people using the natural resources to make craft and arts, and so there's something you're big on promoting Guyana through arts and craft. Tell us a bit of how WIN program now fits into that and your vision for that.
I'm glad you asked me this, because in 2020, in the height of COVID, and as we were getting out of COVID, I looked around and I saw a lot of women were not in the labor force. And when we saw the stats, they were way behind the men in the labor force. And one of the things that COVID did was to provide a platform for a lot more women to get into the entrepreneurial avenue of things. And from the mask venture that we started to counter or to help those persons who were dealing with the COVID, it mushroomed into people making things like soap using coconuts, and the coconuts that would have been left to one side, or using anything from lemon to clay to all of these natural things into the world of skincare and makeup, looking at candles and looking at foods, creating convenience foods, looking at foods, because the world started back to go at a rapid pace again. And all of this moved into us really ramping up things at the Guyana Women's Leadership Institute. And we started off with the WIN program, which is well known, and every year over 10,000 people apply for that program. This year we are targeting over 11,000 persons for the WIN program. And we started the Empower program for men equally so. But moving along, it was that recognition that people were finding the things in their community, their environment, whether it was agricultural products or any of the ones I mentioned before, and putting them into packages that became attractive and appealing. And so I started to think, not just what they were doing, how can we properly package it? How can we make it marketable? How can we look at supply and demand? And how can we provide an advertising platform, at that time starting with women? And how can we allow them to network among themselves? So WIN was born. And from then to now, we have seen women just take these opportunities and run. We have seen people come up with condiments. I know I actually find 2 or 3 women's supplies that I buy all my pepper sauce from, because it's so good and it's local. And I always believe that when we make these things, we should have a place where people can come, purchase it, and don't keep it at home. Share it with people overseas. And that's how we're going to get more of our people who are doing these kinds of things on the world market. So the We Lift program was born, and this year we are looking at about 350 women-owned businesses that will be on exhibition, and we are hoping to have that in the first week of April. And already the advertisement was placed yesterday, and we have 110 people who signed on to that. But Romario, going back to how they can use their art and craft, going into the hinterland, going into the indigenous communities, working with them on garment construction, and looking at the kind of work that they do on their necklaces, their jewelry, and saying to them, look, if you create an environmentally friendly package, like a bag, you can now embellish it with your craft, your culture, your heritage on that. It's adding value to your product. It's also giving an identity to your product, where it comes from. And then that ties into tourism. When we see government pushing tourism, especially in village economies, to drive those economies, what can people come to your village, your community? What can they see that is indigenous to your community and village? And it says that I'm from Guns, or I'm from Barometer, or I'm from Shulinab. What are those things? So it is having a lot of those discussions, and I've had a lot of those. How we can integrate all of those kinds of things together to make things that are not only identifiable to the village, but also something that resonates with our overall Guyanese identity to begin with. And then when you look at the standards, you want them to be able to take their product, so they have the Made in Guyana label. So it's moving everybody to that level and saying to everyone, there's nothing that is not possible. All you have to do is have an idea, and we are not only training you through WIN, but we are telling you, use our business incubator and have the expertise that is available there to you to develop your business plan, to get funding. We have given a number of grants in the last few years that we've been in government directly to women. We have focused on women who experience gender-based violence, domestic violence, and we have been able to really move them out of a lot of situations by doing exactly that.
You mentioned the business incubator. It's housed at Coven John at the Ghana Women's Leadership Institute. Tell us a bit of when you came into office, what you adopted at that institution, and how, over the years since this administration has taken over, the transformation that that institution has taken.
I would say to you, it is beyond description, because I remember going there and it was a shell of an institute. I walked in, things were in disrepair, the computer room had cobweb, the computers were broken, nothing was happening really. They had one or two members of staff. And if you go there now, it's radical transformation. It's a hub of activity. That is the center for WIN. That is where you would walk in. The exterior has been maintained, but when you walk into that building, right away, you can get to the business incubator. So people are going there and they have access to computer expertise. You go upstairs, there's a very modern training hall that is there, that is a home to so many different classes. And then when you go further, there's a brand new computer lab that is there. And that computer lab was one of the first things that we put in to not only train people in ICT, but to give women the opportunity to be able to go in there and use the computers, to access classes, to come up with their business plans. And then when you go upstairs, that's a current project happening where we're going to be developing a garment and fashion lab. And so we're not only looking, I think people's expectations climb. People's expectations will get more based on what they have been exposed to. I mean, it's like going into a community, for example, going into Sophia and training 50 women. And now we are looking at setting up a hub there so that they can continue to do that. And listening to the young women saying, well, we don't want to make school clothes only. We want to make something fashionable. So it's taking it to the next level. And going back to what you said, but how do we get our people's work on the world stage? Why should we not have another series of fashion designers emerge? We have some excellent people already, but why don't we have the next generation? And this is how it moves upward. Within that compound, there is also the culinary center. Those programs will start rolling out soon. But I want to make the point, Romario, while GWLI is the home of WIN, the hub of everything, and people associate it with women, we have the Empower program. And equally, as we are providing all these courses for women at no cost to them, the males can have the same opportunities as women, and they have started coming on board, and I want to encourage more of them to get involved. We have had a very successful program focusing only on young people, where 1,000 young people benefited from our online courses. And the other thing I want to say, not only about the genders, but also about the where. While it might be there and located there for anyone to access, we also go out into all of the regions. So all the training I'm talking about, it's region-wide. So from regions 1 to 10, we have had that training. And this year, we are going to amplify that to ensure that we exceed our target of 11,000. Now, Coursera is the online aspect of this. And there is a part of Coursera where you have an authorship course. So a lot of the programming could be done directly by us and not necessarily from the universities that we get a lot of the programs from. So there will be some programs that are specifically geared to what we require. For example, I'm jumping to this one. You didn't ask me this, but we are opening our day night care and early childhood centers, one in Region 3 and one in Region 4. And when we open those, we will be focusing on childcare. And so we need to train persons for those facilities and for another program that will be mushrooming out of that, which is our home-based care programs, where we are encouraging women to be trained in childcare, knowing that when they're trained in childcare, they're also trained in special education and also trained in early childhood development. That's a massive program that work has started last year and will now yield the results this year. In that sense, that we are encouraging women to set up their own day and night care facilities. We will have the model centers, we will train them, we will work with parents and children, and this is the age bracket from 0 to 3 years, 9 months before they enter the school arena. And by training and equipping them with the skills and giving them the ability or the impetus to have support from government, we have the subsidy that we offer persons who open their own care centers. Once they're licensed and registered with us and people send their children, we can now also support children going to those daycare centers, day night care, early childhood centers. And the concept is novel, doesn't exist anywhere else. So it's Guyana's model. And I also want to say that when we are doing that, we are working on a lot of social issues. If persons are going out and they're going to be working longer hours, they're going to be working in the evenings, they want to make sure where they place their children, one, it's convenient for them to pick up their children, and two, the persons who are giving the care are fully equipped with the knowledge to do so. And we have been supported by UNICEF in developing the curriculum for the early childhood development. That work has been done. We have trained a number of persons who already operate daycare centers across Guyana. We have equipped them with the early childhood development kits, and we are offering some incentives to a new batch of persons who would have been trained in childcare, early childhood in particular. A lot of this work is a collaboration between the Child Care and Protection Agency and the Guyana Women's Leadership Institute under the WIN arm of things. And so early childhood in this year's budget is going to be a major focus for us.
Speaking about childcare issues, when this administration took over in 2020, there was a vast difference between existing childcare facilities, registered childcare facilities, and licensed childcare facilities. This administration has taken a real bull by the horn and tightened, the straps on licensing and having people fully compliant with childcare facilities. Shed some light on 2025. What is in store?
So this again was a major project that we started in 2024 and will continue to have all licensed. We have already completed over 90% of the licensing and the registration of the existing childhood facilities, and we are working with all of them to make sure they become centers of excellence. In fact, there is a target to about 50 to 75 of those to become model centers, and once they become model centers, they will serve as the centers where persons desirous of starting their own, they can actually go and see how this is being done. Again, this was supported by UNICEF, and I want to say we are very careful about it because coming in I realized that a lot of these places were not licensed. They weren't, I would say, in alignment with the minimum standards, and so all of those things are being regularized and being dealt with. And Romario, while we talk about childcare, a lot would have been done legislatively too by this ministry and policy wise, whether we look at the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act, we look at the Family Violence Act, we look at the Hague Convention and resuming inter-country adoption, starting for the first time in the country, the central authority. So now we can have children being adopted. and not only resuming but in compliance with the Hague Convention, ensuring that the interest of children is priority. A number of pieces of legislation would have been reviewed. We are looking at amendments, and so it is creating the legislative framework for all of this to work. And we did a lot of work also on gender-based violence. The Spotlight Initiative closed off, and what we have been able to do is integrate everything started under Spotlight in the national program. And that is significant because we have seen before many programs have started, and once the funding goes and the initiative stops, that's the end of it. That did not happen. So every single program that was started under the Spotlight Initiative is now a national program under the ministry, in fact, making our gender-based violence a model program for this region, coming out of Guyana as the model for our response to gender-based violence. And we look at the gender-based violence policy, we look at the framework, we also look at the number of measures we have put in, the 914 hotline for reporting. We have looked at the legislation, we have looked at the Survivors Advocate program. We've also looked more recently at the Hope and Justice Centers, which is those things are changing the landscape in the country because we're providing all of the services under one roof. The first one was opened in Lusignan. The newer one is in Virgin Region, Region 3. We have a mobile version of this in Region 1, and we are going to be working outwards. And this is a collaboration between the Ministries of Human Services and Legal Affairs. And we are taking, as you said, the bull by the horns. These are real social issues that have happened. And we had a tiny, I say it's tiny, people say it's very significant. We had a tiny bit of progress, but you might say significant. When 33, we dropped, and we saw only 33% of murders when they were related to domestic violence. Compare that to before, when we were seeing such a high rate before. As I said, I am very measured and very cautious in what I'm saying, but it means that the continuation, the strengthening of all these programs, they augur well for what we are trying to do. It's not only putting the systems in place, it's building human capacity, it's adding things like legal recourse, the legal pro bono initiative. Now, government heavily subsidizes legal aid and would have been doing that since before these 5 years. The PPPC government has done that. And so we have continued to do that, but now we've added the legal pro bono initiative, giving 500 persons who experience domestic violence the opportunity to have free legal counsel. And that is also in the Hope and Justice Center. We have a unit now at the ministry in the last couple of years that provides that. We also have the partnership with the Ministry of Legal Affairs, and they brought restorative justice now to all of our Hope and Justice Centers. So it is really, and one of the things we must say, and I will say it, is not looking at any issue and only dealing with it from a single way. It's a multi-pronged approach. This year we are looking at the introduction of a major program that focuses on perpetrators and how we can look at rehabilitation. And we're also looking at men at risk, and how we can prevent the kind of behaviors that will lead to violence. This is a very ambitious program, and that is a program that will start very soon, literally as soon as the budget is passed. It's called the Brave Circle program, and it focuses on all the elements that are required to prevent violence, to address it early o'clock, and to look at also the Foundations program, which was started under the Spotlight Initiative, focusing on the ages between 13 to 25. What are the patterns that we can prevent? What are the risky behaviors of young people so that they don't either end up being in violent relationships, experiencing it, or being perpetrators of violence? And so we are also opening a number of youth-friendly centers, and these hubs will be opened in most of the regions. We opened 2, and we are all set to open a few more, to a maximum of 10 in the first half of this year, focusing on young people, giving them a space where all of the discussions on their health, well-being, mental health in particular, And mentorship, we're rolling out a mentorship program as well. As you know, we spent a lot of time with our young influencer program dealing with anti-bullying, anti-body shaming as campaigns. Those things will ramp up. We're focusing on the aspect of bullying in particular as it deals with children and youth living with disabilities, how to prevent bullying and that kind of thing. But when a young person goes into our hub, they can have help with the homework, they can enjoy recreation. It's all healthy, positive environment and building of young people for the future.
The Ministry of Human Services is expanding from a central point of the capital more towards the outlying regions of Guyana. We want persons to be associated with, spreading the positive messages and so, and human resources integral towards the work of the Ministry of Human Services. You're in each region, you have probation officers in each region, you have child care officers in each region, you have survivor advocates, you have the ICANN community as well. Tell us a bit of how this helps you in achieving your goal as the Minister of Human Services.
I think human resource, any sector to really maximize or optimize its performance depends heavily on human resources. Coming into the ministry, we had a huge paucity of human resource. We have continually been building on that. It is something we need to continue to build on. But as we expand with the delivery of our programs, as we get more involved in responding to critical issues, we are not only looking at where people are, but how they can connect and how they can serve better. There is a remarkable digital transformation that will be coming to the ministry in this year that would have been worked on, where every office will have the capacity to process information across the regions. And that is significant, Romario, because no longer will there be heavy dependence only on the central level of things. So when you look at case management for child care, for example, a case comes in, and through the digital system that we're putting in place, that case will be tracked from beginning to end. So follow-up is very important. It's not only making a report, what happens to the beneficiary at the end of the day. And same way I could speak about children, we are opening a unit, the senior citizen unit, that will benefit from all those people in all the regions. And, I've seen a lot of articles out there in the media, people saying we don't have and we don't have. But like, for example, there was an article mentioning that there are no officers, no child care officers in Region 1. Erroneous. We have child care officers in Region 1. And while we might not have 10, what we do is we have the service, and when there is need for further support and assistance, that is provided. And by creating these hubs, like we have the social services hub in Region 1 that I mentioned, this is also another way of us continuing to enhance and increase and improve the services in the hinterland communities, for example. And we are working to develop a number of things. If you look at gender-based violence, for example, survivors advocates, you mentioned that, officers, social service officers, child care officers, all of these people will have to integrate what they do. So it's the development of referral pathways, support networks, and then how does this move beyond the service providers in the ministry by the program you mentioned, the Community Advocate Network program, for example, I Can, We Can. And it would have involved training of people in communities on the ground as first responders who can now interface with our officers, and then we have that kind of network, the local board of guardians, all of these people. They might not be directly employed by the ministry, but they complement the work that we do. And I sincerely appreciate the efforts. One of the big things we are going to be working on this year is effective customer communication. And I want to do this because very often we get complaints about how people are dealt with and treated by maybe people in our ministry. Let's say it for what it is. And so we're going to be working across the ministry to address those issues so that every officer will be trained on customer service and on effective communication. And those are very key things, because you can have all the services in the world, but if they are not delivered properly and people do not feel the impact of your care, your humanity, your compassion, and all of these things, yes, they get a service, but so those are other areas. So the development, the human capacity development is also going to be key in what we are doing this year across the ministry. In fact, we are curating a number of courses so that our officers within the ministry will have to do those courses through Coursera as part of capacity building within the ministry.
Yeah, capacity building is a major part in what the ministry needs to continue its good work. If we could turn a bit to trafficking in persons, this is the eighth consecutive year that Ghana would have ranked in its Tier 1 status. Could you shed some light on what has been significant in achieving that and what is in store when it comes to trafficking in persons in 2025?
Well, trafficking in persons is a very serious issue, and it is something that we have been actively working on. We usually work in collaboration with the Ministry of Home Affairs. The passage of the Counter Trafficking in Persons Act was a significant milestone, and within the confines of that legislation, there are a series of things that have to happen. We will be working through the Ministerial Task Force, continuing our work to develop a national action plan. We have also almost finalized the internal SOPs that will guide how we deliver the services to those persons who experience trafficking in persons. But embedded in the legislation is a very important thing. Things like restitution, ensuring that people are compensated. That's a big deal. Working more on prosecution, working more on reporting, having people report these kinds of things, working more on our shelter support, our support services. Many people are not aware that when someone comes to the ministry, it is not only the immediate help that they get. They have long term support from the Ministry of Human Services, everything from helping them with shelter to employment to training until they're fully back on their feet. And public awareness has been a big thing. So you would have seen on the trafficking in persons to ensure that we deal with all the recommendations coming out of the country reports. Public awareness, reporting, prosecution, those have been big things that we have managed to fulfill. In fact, one of the reasons that we have maintained our Tier 1 status is that we are consistently acting on all the recommendations, and there would have been measures put in to ensure that at no time we backslide. Now, we are also working on an interministerial or interministry coordinating group where the technical officers, they have been meeting for the last 2 years, where they work even closer to ensure that the crime of trafficking is dealt with condignly, and that includes the Guyana Police Force. So a lot of the work behind the scenes could not really be understood when you see that somebody is convicting, but that's a big deal. It meant a lot of things have to happen. Raids have to happen. And not only raids have to happen, you have to investigate, you have to screen people, you have to deal with a number of reports that come to ensure that they are really persons who are trafficked. And then the kind of support that the Ministry of Human Services provides, it's a psychological and socio-economic support, and that again will be intensified.
Definitely. Psychosocial support to alleged victims of trafficking in person is a major aspect of it. And the Counter Trafficking in Persons Department of the Ministry of Human Services has been playing a vital role also in sensitizing the public in identifying cases of trafficking in persons so that you're engaged with the public and they would be able to identify situations. Another thing that the ministry is keen on is developing facilities, and the Ministry of Human Services really caters, I would say, from the cradle to the grave. Everyone from a child to the elderly. And some people are left to the wild, I would say. And the ministry has transformed the night shelter. Could you say how this facility and other facilities under the care of the Ministry of Human Services intends to further elevate themselves in 2025?
So the night shelter, I would say, is a project that is an ongoing one. It's in constant evolution. I remember visiting that facility in 2020. I always say that it's one of the first facilities I visited, and I was horrified at the conditions under which the elderly, the indigent, and homeless. I mean, yes, people may be on the streets, but you have to give them that dignity and respect and that care too. Night shelter has undergone a transformation from the dorms. every dorm has been refurbished in the last few years. We have expanded the capacity of the night shelter. I remember the third building in the night shelter, going there, and there were just what you call almost like a fence type of material where people slept in. And I thought, but how could we have people sleeping in there? There are no doors, there are no windows, it's just this kind of arrangement. That dorm has been refurbished. We have isolation rooms, so people when they come in, you suspect they may have TB, for example. I must compliment Miss Vera Sami and her team. They have been doing exceptional work. There is an excellent collaboration between the Ministry of Health, the Georgetown Public Hospital Corporation. You have weekly visits, mental health unit as well, weekly visits to the night shelter for persons to check on those who are there for their mental health, to give medication, the clinic visits, the dentistry that has happened, the surgeries that have happened. People have come off the streets and have been given a new lease in life. When persons come in there with cataract, they get the cataract done. They have tumors, they have the tumors removed. I mean, the stories are not just stories. The people that would benefit from these intervention, it really, it warms your heart. I went last year to their Christmas social and they had a talent show. And it was amazing to see the persons who came in there with addictions or who came in there for all manner of reasons. They were withdrawn when they came in. They had all kinds of challenges. And here they were. And they were out there and they were, expressing themselves in talent. We're now building a kitchen in the night shelter. Never had that before. We're looking at how we can develop a kitchen garden there. We're looking at those persons there developing a little library. So aside from housing those people, there have been some stories of getting them connected back to their families. People might not know that, but if we can find a family member, the officers there do that. And people have been nicely reintegrated back with their families. So the night shelter is a place that's very close to my heart because I've seen it. I've seen how we've made that kind of impact in people's lives. But you spoke about other buildings as well. So we have been upgrading, rehabilitating a number of buildings. If you look at our children's shelters, all of those will benefit from upgrades. We did or I would say we built from the ground, a kitchen and dining facility for our children's center in Sophia. We are now redoing all the dorm facilities, looking at study areas for the children. It is ensuring that when children are in our care, they're in the right kind of environment, conducive to study, conducive to recreation which they need, but also conducive to their mind. Because when they come in there, they come in very traumatized. So we want to give them the kind of environment where they can really, really come out and have some level of normalcy from whatever troubles and tribulations they may be experiencing. And so a lot of our buildings, I mentioned Guyana Women's Leadership Institute, whether they're new buildings like Open Justice or the day and night care facilities or now the children facilities and even the tip shelters, all of those things. We have new domestic violence shelters. So we're expanding our shelter capacity. We're expanding how we are looking at all of these buildings, and joining all of that would be the new senior citizens home.
Very much so. A lot of work done by the Ministry of Human Services since 2020 and a lot more work to be done in 2025. As we wrap up, Minister, could you just, in a nutshell, encompass Budget 2025 and what it means for the ordinary person?
I think Budget 2025 should not be looked at in a silo. Budget 2025 has to be looked at along with every preceding budget. And we need to know where we started from, what we started with in 2020. Let's go back. We can't say, okay, here we are, and we divorce our mind from where we were. Look at the tax. Look at how all the taxes were reversed. Look at the fact that in spite of inflation, in spite of all the global crises happening, we've managed to cushion very key things. Energy is important. We're looking at the cost of electricity. We're looking also the cost of fuel. Those are key things that everyone needs. We're looking also at water. And we're looking at the development that is happening in remote and rural communities, more wells being put into place. Everyone wants to own their own home. Government didn't stop at 100 homes. They are now on a linear trajectory to exceeding the thousands of homes that they would have promised to people. So it is not any one thing, it's so many things. Where we were and where we are, and where we continue to go and where we will go in terms of education and all the things I mentioned, and in terms of health. So when you look at the budget, I would say it has taken us on an upward momentum where we are looking at every aspect of life and how all of these things combined work towards the welfare of every individual. Many people say roads. What do roads do? Roads not only increase connectivity, roads also reduce the frustration of traffic. Roads also help you to save time with the reduction of traffic that you experience all the time. And the more roads we put in, you'll have that. But also farm to table. You look at farmers having more opportunity to get their produce and products to different places. You look at the intersecting of communities, and then we look at the infrastructure in general. How are we adding to the infrastructure? More hospitals, more schools. These all of these things are providing more amenities. Think about if some communities didn't have hospitals and schools, the distance they would have had to travel. So not only again distance, when you have to look at the human capacity, you develop your population. All of these things that will be built, they require personnel. So you're gearing your people up in a country, across the country, all the peoples to staff all of these things, but to be a part of what the developmental trajectory is. We can't have a developmental trajectory where you are leaving the human capital behind. You have to take them with you. And so while some people are beyond maybe the hiring thing, then you're looking at how 73% of the budget focuses on the elderly, making sure that, yes, maybe they're not in that labor market stage, but we are making sure that we provide for you. If you look at Guyana, it's one of the few countries in the world that would have a non-contributory pension that is not means tested, and you just hit 65 when you access your pension, for example. So it's really going out there and looking at everybody and all circumstances and a continuous build up from where we started to where we are. So I would say to everybody, Budget 2025 should never be looked at as only Budget 2025. Look at it, see it as just another building block. And there will come a time when we'll get to the zenith in our country, but we are doing well, and it's not splurging, it is also measured. Because if we just splurge, then we'll end up in a debt crisis, which we never want to return to. Back in the days when every child was born with debt on his head, now every child is born with $100,000 on their head. Very different. So having said that, Romari, I hope everybody will look at it, read the budget, understand it, and I see there are lots of very good information coming out, simplifying how the budget will impact on a person. And there's so many opportunities. I want to just encourage everybody from the child to the adult, utilize the opportunities. They are there for you, and we can't see ourselves too on a silo. All of us, we are all necessary for the development of this beautiful country of Guyana. We just have to make sure that we develop ourselves so that the development is not here and we're there. Use it, seize the opportunities, and together let's build this beautiful country of us to a point where, it's something beyond our comprehension.
Thank you, Minister, for these valuable insights into Budget 2025. And there you heard from the Honorable Minister of Human Services and Social Security, Dr. Vindhya Persaud, on Budget 2025.